2017 was certainly a big John Denver year for movies. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2017 action spy comedy sequel, Kingsman: The Golden Circle. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, ranked lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Kingsman: The Golden Circle stars Taron Egerton, Colin Firth, and Julianne Moore, and was directed by Vaughan. It tells the story of Eggsy, now a Kingsman agent, as he teams up with the Statesman to stop a cartel leader's evil plan. Kingsman: The Secret Service seemed like the perfect kickoff for a franchise. It had an interesting premise, did a great job with world building and setting up its main characters, and as a spy film, was ripe for the episodic mission-based approach that Bond took with its sequels. Now, I was a little late to the game with Kingsman, having missed the first one in theaters, but I was very much looking forward to this sequel. I did see this one in theaters, though, during the MoviePass heyday, and I have to admit, I was a little underwhelmed. And rewatching it now, I'm still in that same place. I don't think it's a bad movie, but I don't think it was able to live up to its predecessor or capture quite that same tonal or genre balance. Now, it's totally possible that the story of the sequel had been planned from the start, but at least to me, it really feels like this movie was specifically crafted based on perceived responses to the first film. And that might sound kinda logical, to design a sequel around what people liked in the first movie, but unfortunately, I think they went about it in the wrong way. They knew what people liked, but not why they liked it, so it comes off feeling kinda hollow and artificial. I think that's most evident here with the plot. It's not bad, but elements of it feel out of step with the first film, even though it was trying to capitalize on its success. There are some unexpected and sudden events that happen fairly early on in this film that actually render pretty big chunks of the first movie moot. Certain things from that movie get ignored, others get reversed, and none of it feels like a natural progression. It just feels like they thought some characters were more well-liked than others, and threw some plot points into the mix to ensure those characters were the focus. And not just the focus, but that most of the other characters are barely in this movie. So, as script convenient as the Doomsday Protocol is, it does open up quite a bit for the story and for expansion on the world building. The establishment and exploration of this secret spy world was one of my favorite things about the first movie, so I thought the idea of the Statesman as this US-based version of a spy society was pretty cool. I'll admit that I didn't really like many of the Statesman characters, other than Ginger Ale, but I did like seeing their version of this whole operation. And just like in the first movie, we're seeing it through Eggsy's eyes, so it had this element of awe to it again. I doubt they'll end up going this route in the future, but it would be interesting to see if there are other countries who have their own something-men organizations. In addition to the plot, the style of this movie also seems to have been affected by that questionable crafting I mentioned earlier. The first Kingsman was a really great blend of espionage, action, and comedy. It was really entertaining and fun pretty much all around. And this sequel's still fun, it's just not as fun. It doesn't have quite the same natural, playful feeling and seems a bit artificial at times. The same thing applies to the action. Some of it's nearly as good as that of the first film, but quite a bit of it goes overboard with the heavy stylization. The opening car chase and the final diner showdown are prime examples of this. Again, they're still entertaining to watch, but feel excessively artificial this time around. Much like the first film, The Golden Circle frequently draws inspiration from and pays homage to James Bond. It doesn't name drop this time around, but there are plenty of fun references and allusions to classic Bond movies here. Some are fairly obvious, like the martinis, but others will probably only be spotted by people who've spent some time watching James Bond, especially the Moore era. We get an underwater car, like in The Spy Who Loved Me, a cable car scene that's reminiscent of Moonraker, and one of the Statesmen even has an American flag parachute, a clear reference to Bond's Union Jack skiing parachute. The Lazenby era even gets in on the references, with a snowy mountaintop lab like in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But the Bond references extend to something even more essential to the plot. The villain. Much like its predecessor, this film's got a very larger-than-life eccentric villain threatening the world in classic Bond villain form. And although Valentine was a little underwhelming for me in the first movie, Poppy was just about the perfect blend of psychotic and wacky. Her whole 50s-style jungle hideout and robotic aesthetic was extremely strange, but I think it actually worked in the broader context of things. And as over-the-top as it was, I thought her villainous plan was pretty decent. She actually reminded me of a blend of a few Bond villains, and in spite of the over-stylization and heavy tech reliance, the whole movie did a fairly good job of honoring that classic Bond feel again. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. The biggest pro this time around was the villain. Kind of an interesting reversal, because the villain was probably my least favorite thing about the first movie. But Julianne Moore does a great job bringing this unsettling mix of superficial sweetness and menace to the character of Poppy. She may not be physically imposing, but she's very skilled at psychological intimidation, and comes across as dangerous and unpredictable. And rather than having a scheme that's kind of falsely altruistic like Valentine, her evil plan is motivated almost exclusively by money, so despite her eccentricities, she feels like a pretty believable villain. Pro number 2 is the expansion of the world building. I wish they didn't have to tear down so much of what they established in the first film to do it, but I did like the idea of the Doomsday Protocol as well as the Statesman. It's one of those things that you don't really expect, but when it happens, it makes perfect sense. In the world where the Kingsmen exist, of course there would be analogous organizations in other countries. And I gotta say, the way they were able to reasonably work them into the story on 2 different fronts was pretty impressive. On the con side, the biggest issue has got to be what I'm just going to call the suddenness. So I'm not going to spoil anything, but there are 2 big unexpected moments that happen in this movie. One pretty early on, and one about halfway through. And although both of these moments have a big impact on where the story ends up going, they don't feel natural, if that makes sense. They felt like things that were added to cater to a cinema scorecard rather than where the sequel should have actually gone. The first unexpected event especially comes out of nowhere, and since it happens so early on in the film, you don't really care in the way the movie wants you to, because you haven't had time to reestablish your connection to these characters yet. The second con comes from a similar place, and it's that some of the action is very artificial. So the action was one of my favorite parts of the first movie. It did a good job of giving us stylized and entertaining comic book inspired sequences without going too far, visually speaking. And some of the action here still follows that pattern. There are just a few sequences that go a little too far with the stylization. I mean, they look cool, but they're so laden with obvious CGI that it kind of pulls you out of the story rather than grounding you in the coolness of it. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying any of the films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Kingsman: The Golden Circle 3 out of 5 paws. The movie has its issues and doesn't come close to the entertainment levels of the first movie, but it's not a terrible way to spend a few hours. I would recommend Kingsman: The Golden Circle to people who really liked the first Kingsman movie, or more generally, Matthew Vaughan's directing style. It's not as good as the first film, but still offers enough to provide some enjoyment to fans. People who like action comedies in general will probably like chunks of this movie too, but just know that it does rely quite a bit on the audience's knowledge of characters and events from the first movie, so it's probably better to check that one out first if you haven't already. If you liked Kingsman: The Golden Circle, I would most obviously recommend Kingsman: The Secret Service. It's the first film in this franchise, and not only does it establish the world and characters, but it also does so with a bit more assuredness and tonal balance. If you like this movie and want a Bond movie that reflects some of the story, you should check out the 11th Bond film, Moonraker. It's also got a metal-augmented henchman, a memorable cable car scene, and some equally over-the-top qualities. And if you just really liked Elton John here and like movie connections, you might want to watch Rocketman. It's a biopic musical about Elton John's life, starring Taron Egerton, Eggsy, as Elton John. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Kingsman: The Golden Circle? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie featuring an unexpected celebrity cameo? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.